They're on pretty much every page of the Bible. Many of them are very well known, and yet we often don't pay much attention to them. Names. Which raises the question, what role do names actually play in the Bible, and how much should we take note of them when we study this book? Let's take a look. Welcome to Masterpiece. My name is Chris, and I believe that names actually play a very significant role in the Bible. And one of the reasons for that is simply that they're mentioned in the text. Now, why do I say that? Well, if you've been following this channel, you know that I'm very much convinced that the Bible was written in a very, very intentional way. And one of the implications of that is that everything that made it into this book, everything that's actually mentioned in the text is significant and exactly at the right place. Now, if that's true, then it should also apply to the names in the Bible, whether it's the name of a person or a thing or an object or a place or anything else that has a name. Now, because there are so many names that are mentioned in the Bible, and because we know a lot of them quite well, we might easily assume that the biblical authors always include the name of something or someone. But that's actually not the case. In fact, there are quite a number of instances in this book where no name is given. Just think of the cupbearer and the baker in the story of Joseph, for example. No name mentioned. Or the woman at the well in John 4. Or the thieves that were crucified with Jesus. Or the mountain where Jesus preached the Sermon on the Mount. Now, in each of those cases, the author obviously could have included the name, but for some reason chose not to. Possibly because he didn't know the name, but more likely because it's not essential for us as readers to know, or because he intentionally wanted to designate the person, object, thing, or place in another very specific way. In other words, we can safely assume that the author didn't just forget to include the name, but intentionally chose not to mention it. Which in turn also means that when a name is actually mentioned in the text, it's always mentioned for a reason. And that reason usually has something to do with the meaning of the name. In other words, a name that is mentioned is always significant, which is why I would really encourage you to always look up the meaning of the names that are mentioned in the text you are studying, either in a Bible dictionary or online, and then think about the significance of that meaning in the context of that particular text. So once again, if you're studying a text and you come across a name, look up the meaning of the name, unless you already know the meaning, of course, and then ask yourself how that meaning fits in with everything else that's mentioned in the text. All right, so how does this actually work? Well, let's look at an actual example, and the text we're going to go to is in the book of Judges, and there in chapter 3. So, book of Judges in the Old Testament, right after the book of Joshua, Judges chapter 3. Now, just to get ourselves situated, as the title already says in this book, we're in the time of the Judges, which means that Israel is already in the land of Canaan after they journeyed in the wilderness for 40 years. So they've entered the land, they've conquered most, but not all of it. Joshua, the one who led them into the land, has died, and the whole generation that he led into the land also dies. And what happens once they're all gone? The Israelites forget God, the one who brought them into the land and helped them to conquer their enemies. They depart from God, and they start doing all kinds of evil. So that's the situation at the beginning of the book of Judges. And now we'll pick it up in chapter 3, beginning in verse 7, which says, "So the sons of Israel did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, and they forgot the Lord their God, and served the Baals and the Asheroth. Then the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel, so that he sold them into the hand of Cushan-Rishathaim, king of Mesopotamia. And the sons of Israel served Cushan-Rishathaim for 8 years." Okay, so the sons of Israel do what is evil. They serve foreign gods, and as a result, the Lord sells them in the hand of the king of Mesopotamia, whose name is Cushan-Rishathaim. Now, we could just skip over this name because it sounds weird and is a bit difficult to pronounce, or we could actually take a closer look at this name and try to figure out what it means. So when we do that, we discover that Rishathaim means double evil or double wickedness. So the name Cushan-Rishathaim means Cushan of double evil, or doubly evil Cushite. Now, whether this is his real name or an intentional corruption of his name by the author is not entirely clear. But the real question is, why is the name mentioned at all? In other words, what is the significance of this name in this particular context? Well, for one thing, it obviously emphasizes the great wickedness of this king, which in turn highlights how terrible the situation was that the Israelites found themselves in as a result of their sin, and how great their need of deliverance really was. But the name is also significant in light of the fact that we just read in verse 7 that Israel did evil and that there are exactly two evils that are mentioned. Number one, they forgot the Lord their God. And number two, they served other gods. And there are also exactly two gods that are mentioned, Baal and Asherah. In other words, by giving the name of the king, the author doesn't just highlight how wicked this man was, he also connects Israel's sin and the consequences of that sin and shows the justice of God's judgment, which is further emphasized by the repetition of the verb to serve in verses 7 and 8. Notice, those who engage in the double evil of serving two foreign gods ironically end up serving a foreign ruler named Double Evil. Now the story could end right there, but the good news is it doesn't. If we keep reading, we discover that in verse 9, the Israelites turn back to God. They cry out to the Lord, and what happens? The Lord responds. And he doesn't respond with anger or by saying, I told you so. No, verse 9 says that he responds by raising up a deliverer for them who judged them and who was able to defeat Cushan-Rishathaim. Now, as you may have already noticed, this deliverer also has a name, and that name is Othniel. So what does Othniel mean? Well, it's actually not entirely clear. We know that El means God, but we're not entirely sure about the first part of the name. Yet there is a possibility that it could mean Lion of God, or alternatively, Power of God. And if that's true, it would be quite fitting because it would really reinforce what the rest of the story is teaching. And that's simply this. Deliverance from the slavery of sin and evil is only possible through God and his power. And that power is revealed through the deliverer he raises up to save his people. Which reminds us, of course, of the ultimate deliverer God raised up to save all who cry out to him for help. So that's just one small example, but I hope you can see that it really does pay off to pay attention to names in the Bible. And if you want to know what else you should be looking out for when you study the Bible, then check out this video here where I talk about another really important way the biblical authors communicate with us that most people don't know about. So go watch that next, and I'll see you there.